I'm Barbara Atkinson. I'm the Interim Chancellor. You may recognize the name from the Lawrence Journal World. I'm the Executive Vice Chancellor at the Medical Center and Executive Dean of the School of Medicine. So I'm with you all until August 15th. And as I said yesterday at an event in Wichita, my hope is that nothing happens in the next few weeks. We're going to try during that time, Danny and I, to make a very smooth transition for our new Chancellor, the 17th Chancellor, Bernadette Gray Little, coming in. So that's probably enough of a task. But one of the other things I do want to do is be sure that we institute some really smooth and transparent communication with all the faculty and staff. I think that is something that's really important in difficult times like the ones that we're going through now. So what we wanted to do was give you an update on what has been happening and then have plenty of time, I hope, for you to ask questions. So joining me on the podium, I have Theresa Gordzica, who you, I'm sure, know because you've heard from her about the budget several times. She's the Chief Financial Officer for the university. We have the Interim Provost for the university, Danny Anderson. And now we have Kathy Damron, who is our lobbyist in Topeka here. We're going to speak, and this is pretty much the order that we're going to speak to give our brief introductory remarks in. I thought I won't introduce the whole administration because we have a lot of administrative people here, but I thought there were a few you might not know. Karen Miller, if you would stand up, is the Senior Vice Chancellor at the Medical Center for Academic and Student Affairs, and she's Dean of Nursing and Dean of Allied Health. And Marcy Nielsen has just joined us at the Medical Center as a Vice Chancellor for External Affairs and Health Policy and Planning. So we're really happy to have them here. We really want to welcome people from all the campuses because we are videoing this to the Medical Center campus in Kansas City and in Wichita, and it is on a streaming video to the Edwards campus. So we have everybody together, and we're going to try to make it a blend of what the issues are for all of the campuses. I think you've heard more about the Lawrence campus and a little less perhaps about the Medical Center campus. Medical Center, I think, has heard nothing about the Lawrence campus either, so this goes both ways. Anyway, I appreciate your interest, and I'm really happy that you're here. And so the goal today, really specifically, is to provide you with an update on the recent budget developments from Topeka and talk about how these additional cuts will impact all our campuses. We want to do a brief overview of how the Recovery Act, the federal stimulus dollars, are being used at KU and what the increase in tuition dollars means for our campus. And then we want to provide you with an opportunity to ask questions, as I said before. To set the stage, the Provost will discuss the Lawrence campus issues. Theresa will discuss the finances in general, and we'll do that next. And then Kathy Damron, and I'll discuss the Medical Center financial issues. Kathy Damron will end with the legislative issues. I also want to introduce Marcy Francesco, who is here, who is the senator from this area and also a good friend to KU. Thanks, Marcy, for coming. Theresa, I turn it over to you.
Okay, I think you've got a handout that shows some numbers. I thought it would be helpful to have a kind of a review of where we've been. We started fiscal year 2009 with $275.5 million in state general funds for all the campuses. During the legislative session, we lost $19 million of that, which was a 7% reduction. That cut was made permanent for fiscal year 2010. In addition, we lost another $8.3 million going into 2010. That was in the omnibus session. Just last week, the governor announced his allotments. We expect a 2% reduction in state general funds for the current fiscal year. That's about $5 million for the Lawrence and the Medical Center campuses. So all told, we're going to be, just in terms of state general funds, we have $32.3 million less going into fiscal year 2010 than we had going into fiscal year 2009. On top of that, we have a number of cost increases that we have to cover, health insurance increases, utility increases. That brings, when you add that to the money we've lost, we're down $36.6 million just going into the year. We will benefit from the stimulus funds to some extent. The university will receive about $15.8 million in stimulus funds. That's the amount the regents have allocated to KU for fiscal year 2009 and 2010. They have restricted 2/3 of that money for deferred maintenance, so we'll be using that for deferred maintenance on both campuses, and then the remaining third can be used for tuition mitigation. And we have to be careful how we use that money, that additional 1/3, because it is one-time money and it will go away. So we have planned on using that as bridging funds as a means to get us from where we are now to where we need to get our base to be going into fiscal year 2011. And we may also use some of that for one-time infrastructure needs on the campuses. Finally, you've probably read about tuition increases. The tuition increases will help offset some of the budget cuts, but not much. The tuition increases were fairly modest, and they'll generate about $9.6 million on the two campuses. And as many of you know, that will help the Lawrence campus more than the medical center. The medical center has a very small student population and doesn't generate a lot of tuition revenue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Danny.
Well, maybe I can just set the stage for Danny first. Because I just really want to say that I think so far we've been very lucky that we've not had to do major mothballing of programs. We've managed to cover this first 10%, and now we're looking for ways to cover the next 2% without major changes. But the changes that have already happened are significant, and that's what you're going to hear. And we haven't even told you about some of them up to now, so you're going to be hearing some of this, I believe, for pretty much the first time. But we're really hopeful that this is the end of what we'll have to do, this 12%. On the other hand, I'm not optimistic that it is the last of what we'll have to do. So we really think it's important that all the faculty recognizes that this is where we are today. It's not where we are in times to come, perhaps. We could be better off. We could be not better off. And we are going to talk a little bit toward the end about we are going to someday come out of this, too. So we have to be sure that we've planned for that. So up to this point, we've really managed to actually do pretty well, but $32 million causes a lot of changes. You cannot just cut $32 to $36 million and expect nothing to happen. The tuition you heard from Theresa maybe covered a third at most of what the cuts are, but it doesn't really cut it. It doesn't really cover it. What it does is give you money to spend on programs that you wouldn't have been otherwise able to spend them on, but they're not necessarily the same ones that you had to cut. So it's if you will, different kinds of money. With that, Danny?
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that I would like to emphasize is we're a very dispersed campus. People are at different places. You all experience things in terms of your immediate location. And one of my tasks has been to think about how can I describe what is happening to the whole campus. When you're looking at a 12% cut to your state general funds, that has a significant impact. It affects faculty, staff, students, and we need to recognize that. We're doing everything we can as we've worked with deans, with department chairs to think about how do we make some of these difficult decisions. The priorities have been what can we do to protect our core missions in terms of research and teaching. And I think people have they've done an excellent job trying to accomplish those goals. And our commitment right now as we're moving forward is to think about what can we do to be very prudent as we look at the short term when there is uncertainty, but how also can we be making decisions to think about 2 years from now, the longer term, so that as things begin to recover, we're positioning ourselves to be in the best possible place as we move along. So some of the kind of things I'd like to let you know is, what are some of the impacts on the Lawrence campus of this 12% reduction? In your handout, you'll notice that one of the points is, there are at present 121 fewer positions on the Lawrence campus. That's the 110 searches, open positions that were closed last year. 55 of those were faculty searches that were actively going on. So when you think about what does that mean when you look at our operation this year, it has a huge impact on us. One of the ways that we think about how do you talk about what it means to close 55 faculty searches, if you go back and look at the tuition enhancement project between 2003, 2007, endorsed by students, approved by Board of Regents, one of our main goals was to increase the total number of faculty on the Lawrence campus by 100. And that was a direct response to students wanting to have more choices about classes they were taking, classes in some additional areas, smaller classes. 55 is a significant part of everything that we had accomplished by moving forward there. So it is a real step backward for us as we think about that. In order to come up with the money, and the units have already done that. Last year we were working with the 10%, so they've already put into place things that we're going to feel even more this year. The College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, pointing out some of its strategies, pointed out that there will be 25 fewer GTA positions in the college, and their estimate is that each semester there will probably be 75 fewer sections of classes. So directly thinking about impacts on students. More students in fewer classes. People are doing their very best to accommodate students, to get them into the courses they need to graduate, but there have been real changes. If you go around and talk with the different schools, each one has had a different strategy, a way to approach how are we going to handle what we think will be the best pedagogical approach, accommodating students, moving them in a timely way to accomplish their degrees. So there's many stories that could be told as we think about the different points here. One of the schools, just to give you an example, the School of Engineering is very frustrated. One of the things that they've been doing is responding to a legislative request that we really increase the number of engineers in the state. They've been making great progress toward doing that. But as we look at some of these constraints, they're going to really struggle. And this year, their freshman class will probably be 10 to 15% smaller than it was last year. That means that 4 years from now, looking at how many engineers are graduating and moving out into the workforce, that's going to be the real impact on the state of Kansas. Right now, we're feeling that internally. Look at some of our other programs that work to accommodate high demand. You Can Teach has been an incredibly successful program. We're going to be working this year to find ways, how do we accommodate all of the extra sections needed for the students who are trying to be fast-tracked so that as a new program, they will be able to finish on time in that kind of a program. When you look at some of the high-demand prerequisite courses that require laboratory classes, thinking about nursing, pharmacy, pre-med students, if you need to open an extra lab, you can't simply add one more lab seat in a section. The labs fill, and then you talk about opening a full additional section. So when we look at there being fewer GTA positions, we're looking at there being less flexibility for thinking about adding a complete new lab section in these kind of high demand areas that are crucial. We're talking about areas that we educate students that are leading directly toward workforce development in the state of Kansas, and areas where we are very much doing our best to support the state in terms of areas that need attention from us. One of the other things to think about in terms of the impact of what it means to be looking at 12%, in 1972, there were no merit salary increases. There's been one other time when there were no merit salary increases, and this year there is no general university-wide merit salary increase process, which is a real change. We've usually found some way to eke out something to try and address that need, so that'd be one more indication of things that you could think about in terms of how are we collectively absorbing the impact of a 12% reduction. One of the things that you ought to be asking that I'd expect is, what is the effect of the tuition increases that were approved by the Board of Regents? And there's sort of two stories to tell here. One is those increases in no way make up everything that's been lost with these cuts. I was interviewed yesterday. There's a report in the newspaper today where you can read, we could not ever use tuition to make up what has been lost in terms of these reductions. The amount would be something that we would not consider asking our students to pay, and it would probably not help students come to KU. The other side of what has gone on in terms of looking at tuition is that this year we're going to have a really good chance at meeting our target of trying to recruit a full cohort of students, because the tuition compact is something that has been enacted for a third year. We have 2 cohorts of students who are on Compact 1, Compact 2. That's 40% of our undergraduate students. We've got a new incoming class of beginning freshmen who will be on Compact 3. Those students have predictability. There's going to be no tuition increase for them during the 4 years that they're at KU. So in terms of planning, we continue to be very attractive. Parents talk about this a lot when they're at new student orientation. Students are still extremely supportive of what the compact means for them in terms of planning. So we've got those 2 sides that, we're doing our best to keep tuition low. We're trying to make things predictable. We feel like the regents did a great job in terms of trying to be responsible about the situation that we're in, but we're still trying to keep things as low as possible. We're not making up all that we've lost. Some of the things that you can notice in terms of what are the impacts on you. You'll soon be receiving your annual salary notification letters. One of the things that will be slightly different in those letters is that the language will point out that we're in a situation where there might have to be a furlough. There might be different measures taken in terms of temporary salary reductions, and that those are all the kind of things that the state looks at and charges us with being responsible for as a state agency for administering. And so it's a reminder that those are the kind of things that under budgetary constraints could possibly happen. Later in the week, there will also be a policy that is being pulled together to remind everyone that those are some of the possible actions that could occur during budgetary constraints. The other thing that I would say to think about right now is that we're at a time when this event is very important. We're updating you on what is going on. You can expect more opportunities for conversation. I will be meeting monthly with the deans during Dean's Council, and a lot of our discussion will have to center around some of the questions about how are we planning ahead? What are our strategies? One of our continued beliefs as an institution has been that KU is a great institution. We have made a lot of progress over the last decade in things that we want to accomplish, building on that sense of community and talking about how do we clarify our priorities, how do we make some of these hard decisions, where are we going. It will be a time when, as we're looking at planning and clarifying and coordinating, we will keep relying on those communication circuits to really keep things moving forward in a very positive way and looking more toward the future. There was one email question that I received before this that I did want to respond to in my moments here that basically was asking, had the administrative units in the university been hit as hard as the academic units in terms of the budget reductions? And the answer is yes, with the goal being to protect the academic missions in terms of teaching and research. The administrative side was hit harder than the academic sides. The percentage cuts were much larger on our side in terms of administrative units. Some of the things that you're going to notice during this year as a kind of evidence of that is that there are going to be more potholes. Streets are not going to be repaved as frequently as they were. There may be some kind of paperwork process where you're going to have a unit that's been reorganized working with fewer staff members because they did not fill a position, and it's going to take longer for that to be processed, and that is simply a reality of the kind of things that are going to be going on. One of the things we did that's pretty major is the KU continuing education, which had a significant subsidy in terms of state funding, completely gave up all of its state funding, and it is going to be working completely on a fee-generated basis. We've been working on getting management plans changed so that unit could do that, but that is a big sacrifice that really is helping to cover a lot of the academic units so that we can protect our mission as much as possible. We also have done our best to hold harmless financial aid, libraries. Those are core investments that we can't afford to move backwards in what we've invested in those areas. So I think you're going to see definite effects. You're going to feel it. But at the same time, we've done our very best to think strategically about how we're going to move forward.
Thank you. I'll just point out that I think we've really taken a lot of pains to have efficiencies in how we operate on both campuses, and it's probably you've seen that in whatever group you're part of. What we would have normally done is been then investing that money in the future in new programs and new things, and now we're just trying to make it to the best we can to keep up. We're not even, I guess you would say, not get so far behind because we are beyond the keep up. But instead of being able to really invest in the future, we're now needing to use that to make up for things that happen. Well, let me tell you as quickly as I can what the medical center campus issue is. In the medical center, we have now a $14.5 million cut. And just to tell you in context, I've told the medical center this on several occasions, so I guess they won't be shocked. $14.5 million is the cut. Our nursing school budget total is $8.4 million. Our allied health budget total is $8.4 million. So that cut is the same as one entire school, nursing school going away, and half of the allied health school going away, or vice versa. I mean, just think, this is a magnitude that is really huge and not easy to make up for. The other thing is our budget for the School of Medicine in Wichita. The whole entire campus is about $15.5 million. So this is a $14.5 million cut. Essentially, the whole of the Wichita campus could go away. And we're obviously not going to do those things, but just so you know, the magnitude of trying to think that we're just, cutting around the fringes, it's not that. This is really now at the stage of doing things that are very dramatic. So the specifics are in your handout, but we've eliminated so far, and this was just to get us to the 10% cut, 79 positions, 46 of which are occupied. And what we did in the School of Medicine particularly was try to move people on to new revenue sources. There are two ways you can handle a cut. You can actually make direct cuts, but if you have new revenue, you can move people off state dollars onto new revenue. So we have done that with 363 positions moved on to mostly clinical revenue, but to some extent grant revenue. It's very risky. I won't say it's a little risky. It's very risky because you've all been hearing about healthcare reform, and almost certainly the physician piece of that is going to cause a decrease in what revenue we have. But that is how we came to our 10% cut. The issue of the tuition increase, there are approximately 27,000 students on this campus, therefore a lot of tuition. We have approximately 3,000 students, so we come up with about $500,000 of tuition money. It's not much, I can tell you that. This new cut was another $2.4 million to bring us to that amount. I guess this is good news and bad news. I'll see if I can explain this. The tuition mitigation portion of the stimulus money, the ARRA money, that the Board of Regents allocated to the medical center is $2.7 million. So we can use that money in a sense to replace the $2.2 million and be essentially break even now once again at the start of this year. The problem is that's temporary money, and all that does is buy us this year to cut the base by that entire amount to $2.7 million. We also had used $2 million of temporary money to get us to the 10% in the first place. So we have a problem going into the next year, fiscal year 11, that will be cut the base by $4 million. And that's where I say that furloughs and additional layoffs are really major. And we tend to think of about 10 to 15 to 20 positions for every $1 million. So I can tell you that we're in that same range that we were in this year. But we are going to have a very difficult time finding those positions coming up. So we'll be working with faculty. We have had a faculty task force that looked at a variety of options. The faculty task force actually liked the furlough option the best of multiple bad options. So we will be looking at that, but we'll be studying it more carefully and starting to look at perhaps more specifics of how we might go about doing that. So I'd say that at this point, we're okay for the start of the year. Our hope is just that this is all that we'll have to accomplish to the end of this year. Just difficult to make any more specific outlook than that. You'll be watching the newspapers as we will. But we will be having regular meetings with you all if there are things that happen that you need to know about. And if there's any major thing that happens, we'll have some kind of a more specific and urgent kind of communication to everybody. With that, I'll leave it to Kathy to tell you what the future should bring.
Well, gosh, with that introduction, I guess we should all go out and do what we're supposed to do, which is encourage people to buy aircraft, because that's really where our state is in such a world of hurt in the Wichita area, with job losses there and aircraft orders that are now coming home to roost. And we're seeing a number of furloughs in the Wichita area, which means that their economy is very depressed in that area, which leads to a decline in state resources every month. Just to lay a little bit of context for you, I think it's important to see maybe the bigger, broader picture of how higher education is viewed by policymakers in Topeka, and sort of how their decision-making played out over the last 12 months, because I think it might be a precursor to what lies ahead. And I would just tell you that you really do have, despite the way in which the budget had to be addressed this year, you have strong allies in Topeka. People have said repeatedly at the Board of Regents, in the governor's office, and in the halls of the legislature that they are convinced that it is going to be education that will lead the state of Kansas out of the economic downturn. So they know this, and they believe that every discretionary dollar that they can find should be invested in education. And it's because of all of you that they know this to be true. So you all should really not lose sight of that. You're a very important component in the state's economic climate right now, and policymakers recognize that. There are exceptions, of course, as Marcy would tell you, but we're working on those exceptions too, so that they can become believers and supporters. When Governor Sebelius was elected several years ago, it was after 2011 when we had the last economic downturn, and since that time, up until this past fiscal year, we had seen steady increases in investments in higher education. On average, the state was increasing its commitment to education by about 5%. So we were just beginning to build our way out of what had been the last major cut. And I have every reason to believe that policymakers found that to be a really prudent investment. Unfortunately, this year was such that every single state agency, everyone who relied on the state general fund, had to take reductions. And higher education took about, on average, what every other state agency took by way of reduction. Some took a little less, some took more. But when education makes up 66.5% of the state general fund budget, you can do the math and see that when you're having to plug shortfalls, that's where they have to go for substantial areas of dollars to make up the difference. So when the legislature left town in May, they really, I would say, finished their session with knowledge that their job was incomplete. And by then, Governor Sebelius had gone to D.C. to become Secretary of Health and Human Services, and her very able Lieutenant Governor, Mark Parkinson, had stepped in. And he reached agreement with legislative leaders that rather than prolong the session, I'm convinced we'd still be in session and probably not having very good results by this time, that he would work with them over the summer in finding a way to fill the continued decline in receipts. And so they've done that in the last week, really through two significant actions, which I'm sure that you all have read about. One is they made an agreement to do more short-term borrowing. And so there is an agreement. It was unanimous, which was a very good sign. All members of the legislative body who serve on what's called the State Finance Council voted to support $700 million in short-term borrowing, which is rather significant. That's the largest single short-term borrowing action that our state has ever taken. In advance of that, the governor had to exercise his power of allotments or budget cuts, and he tried to do this in as scalpel-like a manner that he possibly could, and described his actions as saying that while others would say, potentially he should have gone deeper, recognizing that perhaps there were going to be further declines down the road, he didn't feel comfortable making deeper cuts at that point because, rather than assuming that there would be worse news later, maybe there wouldn't be, and if he made the cuts, he was rather confident that people like the university and other agencies would not have those monies restored. So he took 2% from about every state agency, which for the University of Kansas was about $15 million. Excuse me, how much? For the system, for higher education was $15 million. It was 2% for about everyone other than caseloads in human services, people who are reliant upon Medicaid and other social service programs. So what will that mean for the future? What we'll have to do is look at state receipts each month, frankly, and look to see if they're about in line with what the revenue estimates indicated they would be. And when the Finance Council met earlier this week, it was generally agreed to by the governor and the members of the Finance Council that if there were several months where there were temporary drops that were $20, $30 million, they would probably be able to manage through that with good good financial management and not have to do further allotments. However, if we have a long run of months where there are several months in a row where there are $40, $50 million of receipts that are below estimates, then we'll have to re-examine options. Additionally, if we have another month like we had in May, where receipts were $100 million below estimates, that too would cause them to come back into State Finance Council deliberations and either look at a combination of additional borrowing, additional allotments, or potentially, if there is an appetite among state legislators, coming back into special session before January and trying to come up with an alternative by way of a new revenue package. So all of that sets the stage for what will be a very important legislative session, which will begin in January. And Marcia, I don't want to put you on the spot, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add to those comments, any other perspective that you might want to share. Senator Francisco serves as a member of the Kansas Senate 140 and has a great deal of respect from her colleagues. Thus, she has conversations with people who are from a number of different camps, if you will.
I think that's a fair representation of what happened. Certainly, there are, always legislators who are looking at one particular issue or another, but I think the understanding was clearly that we needed to balance the cuts, and I think that would continue to be the same. I don't know anyone who is looking forward to a special session. We are hoping that the stimulus package, changes in mortgages, and just the strength of the state of Kansas will help us get through this. But I'm glad to be here. I certainly want to listen to everyone's comments, and then I would be pleased to talk with anyone individually if they have particular concerns about ideas for the legislature. I will be meeting with the Legislative Education Planning Committee, and certainly if there's ideas that relate specifically to university or higher education, that's an opportunity in those interim committees to bring those things up and have bills ready for the session in January.
Thank you very much.
Before we go to questions, but we're just about there, I just wanted to point out one bit of good news that hasn't been mentioned so far, and that is that there's the stimulus money that comes for higher education to the state of Kansas, but there are also grants that come through NIH that people were able to apply for. And we've put in, I don't even know how many applications, but it's a couple hundred at a minimum. but we have started getting actually grants back already. The review process and the cycles are different, so they have just started coming in. But we have now gotten already $3.1 million of ARRA money at 15 grants, 11 in the Lawrence campus and 4 at the Medical Center campus. Now, I don't want anybody to think that that's going to plug the gap, because those are grants that are given for research in particular areas and for particular things. But nevertheless, it does show that we really are able to take advantage of the programs that have been made available for stimulating the economy, and that's new money for the economy of Kansas. We hope that will really make a difference that helps. So with that, I again thank you all for attending, but now we're ready to open up for questions, and we have a microphone in this area. We have people that can email questions in to Jack Martin, and Jack, I believe, will read the ones to us that come in from the outside, and you all here can ask yours directly.
You can email it to chancellor@ku.edu.
Jim Carruthers, Department of English, and this is for Danny. Has to do with the situation of the faculty on the Lawrence campus. You know that we have had in place for many years, at the mandate of the Board of Regents, policies on both financial exigency and program discontinuance. And when we begin to think in terms of how much worse this might get, I think this would be a good time to review and to reaffirm our commitment to those policies. Thank you.
Well, I would just say I understand that governance is going to have a task force to be reviewing those policies during this upcoming year, and one of the definite things that we're doing is working on ensuring that as part of the communication process going on, we've got to be in discussion about any major decision along those lines. So far, one thing I want to be clear about is we're not talking about financial exigency. That is not what we're discussing here. We have budgetary constraints, there have been cuts, but we're not at the point of dealing with what our policies describe as financial exigency.
Let me just say another thing on the policy front. We do have a new policy that will be a chancellor's policy that will do the same thing, be the policy that backs up the new phrases in your letters. You and the Lawrence campus have yet to get your letters. The Medical Center campuses have actually already gotten their letters with this phrasing in it, but this will apply to both campuses, and it should be out by, I think, the end of this week. It's just going through its final reviews, but it's basically the policy purpose is to fulfill its fiscal responsibilities during times of budgetary constraints or reduction. The university may exercise its authority to reduce employees' salaries or hourly rates of pay, or to implement furloughs as necessary. So a very general policy that says that we could do it. We all of us sincerely hope we don't have to do that.
We have a couple of questions that have been emailed on the same topic of furloughs. One's from the Medical Center and one's from Lawrence. If furloughs are necessary, when would they start, and would they affect some employees more than others?
I'll start that. We really need to do a lot more work to talk about furloughs and what our actual policy would be. We've talked on both campuses, and it's been a little different on both campuses. What we had talked about with our budget task force committee on the Medical Center was that it would not apply to GTAs, student employees, or on our campus, residents in graduate medical education programs. Those residents would have to finish the days at the end, and we'd have two people getting the same pay, so there's no benefit of that. We would also be looking at not having it apply to people who earn $30,000 or less of state money who are not faculty members. The Lawrence campus has been talking about a little bit different policy. Danny may want to talk to that, but we're not set, and we will have a lot more talk with faculty and staff before we do whatever it is.
Correct. I'd say that the policy that Barbara read is a reminder that these are kinds of actions that might need to be taken when we're under budgetary constraints. If we were going to move forward with a furlough, we would actually develop and share, circulate, inform, give people access to a detailed plan about how we would implement it. Similar to the medical center, one of our concerns has been that there are some categories of employees who cannot be furloughed and remain a viable employee. People who have a visa, who might fall out of visa status, some of our employees who are at the lower end of the salary range, that we'd want to find some way to hold them harmless to protect their ability to work. So there are different models that we've looked at. There was extensive discussion of that during one of the budget forum in the early spring, so I don't want to repeat all the details, but it described the possible models that deal with tiered approaches, looking at different levels or numbers of days of furlough based on salary levels. And it is a very complex process of establishing a full plan for implementation, but that would be the next step if we're moving in that direction. One thing to think about when you're looking at furloughs, and there are sort of 2 points here. One, there was a proposal earlier in the spring to have a statewide furlough that would apply to every state employee. Mm-hmm. We would have no choice but to comply with that kind of an order. If we have an internal policy and we have internal plans that are specific for our campus and our institution, that puts us in a better position to be talking about how a furlough could be implemented more effectively so that we could still protect our teaching and research missions. The other point that I want to make about a furlough there is that, I'm trying to think, I've got a lot of things.
I have one more point on it. Just to be clear, at this 12% cut, we are not talking about doing furloughs. So this is in the case that there might be something further than that.
Right. The only thing I would add is what Danny was starting to say. There was some legislative appetite for a mandated furlough on all state agencies, and thanks to the help of Senator Francisco and other supportive legislators, that was tamped down. But I would guess all of these things we'll see reinvigorated next session.
It's the point that I was going to remind people about. A furlough is a temporary solution. Mm-hmm. We're looking at a couple of years that we think are going to be challenges. Furloughs are strategies for addressing them step at a time, which has been the way that we've approached this. Don't make a permanent change. Can you find a way to get through a hard period so that you can come out and recover? A furlough is a tool to help you think about that as one possibility.
More questions? Here, if you can just wait a minute for the microphone. He's coming. Oh, you have to, because there are people at other sites that won't hear you if you don't.
The college, and I guess this is for Greg Simpson too, asked the academic departments within the college to prepare for a 2%, a 3%, and a 4% cut in their budgets. And I'm wondering if that was before this announcement and of the additional 2% cuts, and if there's any indication about really what academic departments will need to cut. Will it be more like 2%? Will it be 3% still, 4%?
Dan.
Rather than Greg, maybe I can answer.
Okay.
I think the scenarios that departments were asked to prepare came when we began to receive indications that May revenues were going to be far below than the projections. So the prudent thing to do is to start talking about how do we have some plans in place so that if some of these possible reductions come about, we know some of the choices we need to be making. That was also before we moved forward in terms of thinking about what our tuition would be set, a variety of things. So I think it's good that you have those plans. I think you need to look at them, think about which ones are feasible, how could you be implementing them. Just like Kathy said, we're going to be observing what happens each month in terms of receipts to try and gauge as we move through this fiscal year, will there be additional reductions that we need to plan for? It's easier if you know at the very start of the fiscal year everything you need to plan for. It's clear that we can't do that now. So we may have to, at a later moment, think about, so mid-year, how do we make this adjustment? What would be some of the best choices? But right now, we're not ready to start asking units to pull in and make some of those kinds of changes. One of the things that we're doing is looking at how enrollments will hold. We feel very confident that things look like they're on a very good track. Our target last year was a really large blip in terms of enrollment. We're looking in terms of models, hoping that things will stay constant around where they were in fall 2007. Doing that, looking at the revenue we have from that, I think will give us a much better ability to move forward and plan. But right now, we're not asking you to start implementing those additional scenarios.
But would it be a retroactive from the beginning of the fiscal year? We were asked for a cut, and so should we prepare in case it is retroactive to the beginning of the year?
Maybe repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was if at a later point in the year a reduction is implemented, is it retroactive over your whole budget for the year? It is.
Yeah.
I think, but the real question is when you think about it, a strategy is when you get to the middle point of a year and you've already spent half your money, what is an effective way to think about meeting that reduction? And so centrally, one of the things that we do is try and determine how can we best protect all of the teaching and research units as we're looking at those realities and the way money flows through the academic system.
Yes.
Danny, I just wonder if we're understating some of the losses here with the numbers that you shared. I know when the deans on campus here met, when we talked about what we were going to search for, what we weren't going to search for, there were lots of us who just didn't never opened searches. Mm-hmm. And I was planning 9 and did none. Mm-hmm. And when we cut $500,000 out of our base budget, we didn't specify it to a particular position, but we lost positions. Now, I don't say that we've lost all 9 of those, but I just wonder, and I mean, I know you're probably counting numbers this year versus last year or whatever, but again, when a high-priced person leaves, you potentially might hire a couple of newer people. I think we're understating the numbers of faculty that we've lost. In the numbers, if we're just looking at actual searches that were closed versus ones that we anticipated that we never opened at all.
I'll just say that I agree with you, that I think we are. It's very hard to capture those kinds of numbers. And one of the things we've done, it sort of addresses the other question too, is we've had a 90-day hiring delay. So if there is an open position, we don't let people recruit. So there's a lot more open positions. What the faculty chose to do in a variety of different departments was, again, just not ever fill those. So again, they ended up as positions that don't exist anymore that used to exist.
No, I think the dilemma is how do we quantify? And that's what people ask for. And so we come up with things that I could go back and explain how I came up with that number. But the actual impact, I think the struggle is how many years will it take us to recover for some of the hard choices that were made? It is a very long process.
This is a process that affects everybody. Even if your job is secure and you're secure and still working, you're doing probably the job of some other person, or you're working with other people who are struggling to get their work done because they've had people laid off in their units. It is important that we really recognize that we got to protect the students and protect our academic programs. We want to try to still supply the absolute best education we can to the most students we possibly can in Kansas, but it's just getting harder and harder to do, and at some point we're beyond being able to continue it exactly as we are. So then we have to look, we still will be trying to make some strategic investments, and I don't want people to think that we will never be hiring anybody. We're definitely hiring people in cancer research areas and areas where we really do need to continue some trajectory. We're sort of putting it on a little bit of pause. We're trying to use philanthropy to fill in the extra money that we need to do that and not use the other money, but it's a fine balance between being ready for the future, doing the best you can for the students, and making some investments at the same time as you make cuts.
We have a email question from here in Lawrence. This person writes that KU has thus far not considered any program eliminations as a response to the need for budget cuts, and asks why don't we cut heavily in areas of relative weakness as measured by student interest, placement outcomes, scholarly output, etc., in order to avoid cuts in areas of relative strength.
Lawrence campus, when you're talking about program elimination as one of the strategies, there's a real difficulty in terms of what does it save you? How quickly does it generate the money that you're talking about? When we're looking at tenured faculty members, the reputation of the university, the credibility of KU being able to recruit people and believe that if they come here, they're going to have a job in the future. When you look at program elimination, that may not save you as much as some people immediately think. One of the bigger pieces that goes on is when you look statewide, the kind of things that we discuss and we're engaged in is looking at how do we deal with duplications or unnecessary duplications of programs so that when you think about the whole state higher education system, we're making wise investments and wise choices. But you know, it's been very interesting lately reading some of the articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education that are going through some of the universities that have used program elimination as an approach and actually talking about the fact that they did not generate the kind of savings and that the damage that it did to the institution may not have been worth it. So, you know, those are kinds of things that, you know, early on when people, you know, when Jim Carruthers raised a question about financial exigency, we're not in financial exigency. That is the kind of action that you begin talking about at that point. In the short term, all units, even when things are good, should be looking at questions about how do we define our strategic priorities. When someone retires or resigns, how do we decide where best to reinvest that faculty appointment in terms of areas of growth and strength toward the future. There are changes over time as you look at academic programs, and that is a normal part of everything going on. Those decisions are going to be heightened when budgetary constraints are strong.
One last question before we wrap it up. Okay, over here's a question.
This is a question, I think, primarily for Kathy and for Senator Francisco. I noticed that the state income taxes I paid this year were down. And they were down primarily because my investments tanked. So I guess it's nice to pay a smaller tax. On the other hand, I believe that our problem is related to the fact that at the current time our state taxes are coupled with the federal system. Is there any talk of changing that? Not that I really want to pay more, but, you know, I still think that people who earn more ought to pay more.
Right. I would like to have Marcy answer that question because she actually was a leading sponsor of an initiative to decouple our state tax code from the feds, and she probably has a good perspective on the feedback she got from her colleagues as to why that was not something that garnered majority support.
Well, and that was not even this year, that was last year, and we had an opportunity again this year to, in the case of taxes or, you know, opportunities for depreciation, to simply say that the federal government had given this opportunity as part of the stimulus package, but we didn't need to reduce our income because of that. And although it did get a hearing in the committee, there was no action ever taken because it's really hard for people in the legislature to even just say the word tax unless we're talking about decreasing them. And I think we really need as a community and as citizens of our state to be able to engage in those discussions. And certainly the university can help. Because there is some interest, I think, in looking at the overall tax mix. And that's going to be the easiest way to approach this. But we find ourselves over and over again seeing bills to grant additional sales tax exemptions. We couldn't, it was awkward to have a discussion about even just maintaining the levels as they existed this year on those taxes that had already been proposed to have continued decreases. So the estate tax. People who were hit with that tax a year or two ago are not really in any different positions from people now, and yet we've got this understanding that somehow all tax relief will be reinvested and appear as income. That is not true if there are no taxes. So we again have to keep saying we are interested in a real discussion about the tax mix. Where do we reasonably owe taxes? I certainly appreciate everyone who's willing to do that. In the same way, I think we as university employees have an opportunity, and I said this in a newsletter, in terms of giving ourselves a furlough if we find over the holidays that we're in a position that we're working for a department that may not need work from us on January 2nd or December 28th or 29th. We can choose to say, here's an opportunity. Can the university look for areas of opportunity to give individual leave without pay? But each of us is going to have to be looking at our actions. How are we helping our department, our community? How can we best participate in helping get through this? And I certainly appreciate all your ideas. I've now started working for the Center for Sustainability, and so we'd also appreciate all your recycling.
Jeanette, the only thing I would add to that is next year the state legislature is looking at a new highway program, which will, the 10-year highway program for the state has expired. So if they're going to have a new highway program, that will give rise to a rather rigorous debate about new taxes. And let me assure you, we'll be at the table. Before any new highway program is built, there will be a large discussion about state priorities and the allocation of resources and where those should go. Not that there shouldn't be an investment in roads. I'm not here to suggest that, but there will be debate, is my point. So stay tuned.
I just want to end by, again, thanking you all for coming, and I hope that you can walk out with a responsibility to help everybody's morale, including our own and your own, because it won't do us any good to really not try to keep the morale as high as possible. In fact, one of the reasons we're having as much trouble as we are is that the state of Kansas is very generous to higher education. Has been traditionally. If they didn't give us this money, we wouldn't be worried about losing it now. I am convinced that in the future we'll have a way of bringing it back, but we really, all of us, have to keep the morale up, keep it up with students, keep it up with all the faculty and staff who aren't here today. And I do want to tell you that we're really open for more suggestions. We have had a lot of suggestions come in, and we're going to be setting up groups on a variety of things to actually look at those suggestions and see what we can do. That could be specific ones about specific buildings or departments, or it can be more general ones. So please feel free to really send us the suggestions, and I forget where we're supposed to send them, Jack.
You can send those to chancellor@ku.edu.
Okay. I guess we'll get them that way. Thank you very much. So thanks for coming.